Where did you live first off when you were just a little boy?
I lived in Mitchell County in what they call the Rock House Creek section. And I remember my sister Helen took care of me when I was real small, more I guess probably than my mother did, because she had so many children to look after, and two of them younger than me. Well, I can remember when the youngest one was born, but she had an awful lot of work to do. Had to milk several milk cows every morning, every night. And if the men folks of the family was working, cutting locust stakes or plowing, hoeing corn, or doing the type of work that farmers had to do back in those days, it's full time for my mother to cook 3 meals a day and try to do the best she could taking care of the children. An older sister of mine, Helen, would tend to me. She liked me. She is a real serious-minded girl. She was real good to me. I'd cry whenever she'd want to go visit with some of her friends. We didn't have many close neighbors. She'd go down in Gastonia. That to me was a long ways. I'd never been there, but I just like imagine Europe would be now. That's a long ways from.
Well, how did she travel then?
Well, they'd usually ride a 2-horse wagon to Spruce Pine, and she'd catch a train and go by train, and occasionally she'd ride a mail car. We'd ride the wagon to Spruce Pine, and she'd catch a mail truck. They had the old, I think they called them Model Ts, but we called them T-Models back in those days. And my Uncle Tom would come up from down in around Forest City, or some of them lived in Gastonia, and on down close Charlotte, some of those little villages where they had cotton mills. That's about the type of work that they were for people to do, and a lot of the mountain folks had moved down in there to go to work, in those factories. They had just moved down there, and that was their home. So he'd drive up to Spruce Pine, and where we lived, it was rough. But I can remember the first car that I ever known of coming to our place, or the person that I ever remember seeing. He drove it up there, and I was down the old wagon road from our house, trying to turn the cow back up the road. The cattle had run their way off. My mother would tell me to turn the cattle back. I was way down that road, I guess half a mile, maybe further. It's a long straight. They called it the Archery Straight. And this Model T, Uncle Tom come up that road, and it scared me. I had never seen one before, and I could hear that thing running, made a loud noise. And I ran back off the road, and he saw me, and he stopped the car and called me and told me who it was, and said, "Come on, I'll let you ride my machine onto the house."
How old were you then?
I guess I was 5-year-old, 4 or 5-year-old. Maybe I was a little hesitant about going to him, so he come on out towards me, talking to me, and I'd remembered him. He told me that my Uncle Tom. He come on, and I remember him catching me under the arms and picking me up. I wasn't very heavy, but he carried me back to the car, and then he laughed about it. I didn't like for him to laugh at me about it and kid me. I can remember him telling at the house about how he had to run me in the woods to catch me.
What did you feel like when you got in that thing and started moving? Was it a strange feeling?
Almost scared me to death. I mean, I was afraid of it. I remember that much. But after we started riding, I thought it was a fine thing. he told me about how much time it'd save, you know, on walking. I'd been used to anywhere going. I went and I walked or rode in a two-horse wagon. And I remember that time. Then one time I went to turn the cows back, and this fella coming up the road, and he had a team of mules and a big old wagon. They was hauling gravel in a wagon at that time to fix a Daletown road. They was graveling it, but they was hauling it in two-horse wagons. And I went way off down the road there to turn the cow back. And John Queen was his name. I never did forget him after that day, but I'd heard his name, but I'd never remembered seeing him up to that time. He saw me on the bank of the road. He come on up and he hollered and said, "Hey, you little old Cox boy," said, "come here." And I run. There's a little old holler stump way out on the bank of the road. I went and got back in that holler stump. And he pulled the wagon up and looked up, and he said, "Come on, ride up with me." He said, "I want to go up and see your dad and mother a few minutes anyway." I didn't want to ride with him. I didn't aim to ride with him. I got out of that stump, and he jumped off the wagon and caught me, and took me on to the house, and I remember him laughing about that. But I didn't like that business, them laughing at me, and I just hadn't never forgotten that. But he took me on to the house, and I remembered him up until about 2 years ago. He passed away a couple of years ago. He'd still tell that whenever I'd see him. I remembered it.
Well, when you were growing up, do you remember, did your daddy ever work on a job, or did he just do farming, or how did he make his living?
He farmed and sold locust steaks and sold what you call acid wood. Back then they called it pulp wood now, or paper wood. And he'd peel. They had to peel wood by hand, mostly poplar wood that we had in the forest there where we growed up. Had quite a lot of land up there, mountainous. And they'd sell that pulp wood, paper wood they called it then, or acid wood. And he'd take wagon loads of that in town. He could haul about a half a cord. He said, I believe 3/4 of a cord, the most he'd ever pulled into spruce pine on a two-horse wagon. And they'd unload it into a box car down there. And back in those days, I'm not positive, it seemed like they got about $3 a wagon load. That'd probably run $6 or $7 a cord, something like that. And a cord of wood's a lot of wood, you know. I think it's 4 foot high, 4 foot wide, and 5 foot long, I believe is what they said was a cord at that time.
So he would take 3/4 a load?
Well, a half. He said 3/4 was one of the biggest loads that he ever hauled on a two-horse wagon.
3/4 a cord?
Yeah, that was a cord and a quarter. I mean, a quarter over a half a cord.
So when he'd get about, if you get $6 a quart, he'd get 3/4 of that then?
Yeah. There wasn't any tax in those days on wood. You just got whatever it brought. And well, I don't know what about state tax. I don't know if they had any of that. We had county property tax and household goods just like you do today, but it didn't amount to nothing like as much money as it does today. We had cows. We had several, usually 2 or 3 milk cows that was giving milk, and we had probably a couple that was dry, and maybe raised, maybe kept 1 stock brute, 2 mules, 2 or 3 calves, maybe a steer. We'd raise a steer a year for beef. My dad didn't believe in selling anything. People in the community that needed anything, he wouldn't price anything. He was always strange. For some reason or other, he didn't believe in selling a cow or a calf. If anybody wanted one and they wanted to give $3, he'd just let them have $3. He wouldn't argue about the price. And I remember my older brother fussing at him for letting a cousin of ours have a cow one time for $7. And said that was one of the best milk cows we had, and you just might as well just to give it to him. He said, well, I would give it to him if he hadn't offered me $3 or $7, I believe it was. And I remember my older brother, he worked the mules mostly on, he got to where he'd take contracts on grading out with one of these old drag pans like these dozers has now. He'd drag out a house place just for he had the handles like a wheelbarrow and 2 mules to pull in it. And he had worked for...
Was that Clemmy?
That's Clemmy.
Yeah.
And he'd work, I believe they said, for $1.25 a day. He and 2 mules, and go to spruce pine on a job sometimes it'd last for a couple of 3 weeks. And he'd just stay there. He wouldn't come home till his job had finished. And I believe he said he and the 2 mules got $1.25 a day, I think is what they said he got. And
What year was this approximately when he was doing this?
he was about 28 or 9, or maybe 30, longer. In the early 30s, there's quite a bit of work. We had that school burned up there at Spruce Pine sometime in the early 30s. And they built a new one, and he got a job. There's several of the farmers there in the Grace Creek and Rock House communities that got jobs with their team, a drag pan in the dirt for the foundation of that school. And I remember that. That's one of the big jobs that I remember. He made some money. I don't know how much, but they talk like they're that smart. I remember he had, I believe he had $37 at one time, and that was about the same as $3,700 today. $37. Well, he worked, say, for $1.25 a day, and if he used to work with a tractor today, or even a team, you'd get probably $130, $40 a day. And I could think about it, talk about it for a while, and come back to my mind, I could tell you a lot of things that happened. A lot of it was sad, and a lot of it I wouldn't even want to tell, but we lived good. We were happy, but I think my mother and father worried a lot. And I know that it was hard times. I didn't realize it then, but I know now that they had some hard times. Coming up with enough food and enough eat, clothes for us to survive.
Well, what kind of meal did you typically eat? Like on for a Sunday dinner, did you have anything special on a special day like that? Or what would you normally eat on a Sunday dinner? What kind of foods?
We usually had a kind of a special dinner on Sunday. My mother didn't like to kill a chicken, but if she could get one of the older boys to wring its neck or chop its head off, she'd clean it, pluck the feathers. She'd clean the chicken, and she'd fix the chicken. If we didn't have any young chickens and had some laying hens, she wouldn't kill one of them unless it laid out. And if it laid out the hen, and they get real fat when they lay out, and she'd fix a pot of chicken and dumplings, especially in the wintertime. We like those chicken and dumplings.
She didn't fry it?
No, she just get them, chop a hen's head off and clean it and cut it up and cook it. I don't know exactly how she fixed it, but boy, it was good. Put dumplings in it, just bread dumplings. And it was really good in the wintertime, and we'd have that. a lot of times, and then we usually raise 2 hogs or 3, maybe kill one of them at a time, or sometimes they'd kill 2 at a time. And the weather was cold in the winters back then, a lot colder than it is now. Dad used to say Thanksgiving Day was you wouldn't have to worry about your meat spoiling if you'd wait till Thanksgiving to kill hogs. If it was a warm day or not, it wouldn't be but a couple or 3 nights till meat would freeze, and it needs to freeze within 2 or 3 days. Well, it's good if it's not too awfully warm when you salt them down, because he claimed the meat would take salt better when it wasn't frozen. Well, you couldn't let it freeze before you salted it because it wouldn't take salt. And he'd cure the meat. He'd take the backbones and ribs, and we'd eat them and divide them with the neighbors around. And didn't save anything like that. The only way you could save it was for it to be cold weather, and he'd put it in what we call a smokehouse and cure it out. Well, backbones and ribs would keep in cold weather for maybe a week or 10 days. We'd either eat them up or give them all away 8 or 10 days. And that was all, just when you kill fresh pork, maybe 3 times a year we'd get it at home, and then the neighbors a lot of times would send us a mess of it when they killed one.
So you didn't ever kill any during the summer then, did you?
Never killed no hogs or beef either one in the summertime.
What kind of meat did you eat in the summertime?
Well, that meat they cured out from the hog is all
How did they store it?
in a smokehouse.
Salt it down and cure it out?
Like you remember the Two Daddy's smokehouse, don't you?
Yeah, yeah.
Well,
But he had to know what the right time of year and everything to cure it,
Yeah, in the
or
winter.
it wouldn't.
yeah, it wouldn't cure in the summertime. It'd spoil.
Well, how about vegetables? Like, what kind of vegetables? Like in the wintertime, what would you eat when the fresh vegetables wasn't in season?
Well, they'd usually bury cabbage. They'd dig a trench in the garden and just pull the cabbage up with the roots, turn them upside down in that furrow, and shovel dirt around them, and then just cover them good and leave the stalk sticking up. And when the ground froze real hard, my mother wanted a cabbage head, we'd take a mattock or something and get back to where you wouldn't hit the cabbage and break that ground. It'd be froze hard a lot of times, and just turn that big chunk of froze earth up there. And a lot of times you pull the stalk out of it, and my mother'd fuss at us for not being more careful about getting them up without pulling the stalk out of it. Because that froze ground, sometimes it's pretty hard to get them up out of the ground. And we'd have apples. They had places, we didn't have good basements like we got now to keep apples in. It's hard to keep from getting them frozen. And they'd take, we didn't have, we had an old dirt cellar, but usually we didn't have room to put many in there. Maybe a couple or 3 choice bushels that my dad would wrap in newspapers and stack them in baskets, set them back in there, and those apples was forbidden to eat till Christmas come. Them was special apples for Christmas. And then we'd have a big box maybe in the barn loft. We gathered lots of apples. We had several trees. They wasn't bothered with the blight, and they didn't get wormy like they would now without special treatment spraying.
Well, I guess it makes a difference. Why do they get wormy
Weather's
now?
changed, hadn't it?
Weather's changed, and I don't know. Some people say that the insects was brought in from overseas and out west, other places. And well, you never heard of a Japanese beetle back in those days. Now bean bugs, we had bean bugs. Then on up in the 30s and the late 30s and early 40s, the blight started hitting the tomatoes. You couldn't hardly raise a tomato in Mitchell County.
What other vegetables did you have besides cabbage and apples?
We had cabbage and apples, potatoes, onions, and summertime we'd can tomatoes, raise tomatoes and can them, and we canned blackberries, gathered fox grapes wild fox grapes and made juice. And when we needed jelly, my mother'd get that juice and make jelly from that. We didn't have this sure gel and stuff like you have nowadays, and we didn't have much sugar. I mean, we'd get 100 pounds of sugar maybe a year at one time, and that's all probably might be all we'd get. She'd use most of that to can with, and she always aspiring with that sugar, and the jelly was, oh, it really had a wang to it. It was so sour I couldn't hardly eat it. I'd like to have some of it now, but back then I wanted sugar. I craved sugar, sweet stuff. Candy was a rarity for us. And brown sugar, 5 cents a pound. And after I got up 10, 12-year-old and ride the wagon to town with my dad, or one of my older brothers, either my dad would give us permission. We'd usually haul a load of stove wood or something to somebody in town. They'd give us $2 for a 2-horse wagon load of wood. And we'd haul it. It'd take us about all day back in to cut it. We didn't have chainsaws like I've got. Had to cut it with a cross-cut saw and split it with an old double-bladed axe. Take a couple or 3 of us, a pretty good day to cut a wagon load.
$2.
And haul it to town and get $2. And our dad would say, "You boys can have a nickel piece of that." Give us a nickel piece for it. And I'd usually buy a pound of brown sugar with mine, that old brown lump sugar. I'd eat it like it's candy, man. I'd eat enough of that to make you sick. Got a pound of it for a nickel. And I guarantee you I could eat a half a pound of it. And we'd ride the wagon back. It'd take us about 4.5 hours each way, going and coming. And time we'd get back, take 4.5 hours to go down there, and take you about 20 minutes to probably carry it into their wood sheds for the arm loads. It split up real fine. Had to carry it and put it right where they wanted it. And I remember Dr. Day and his wife was real particular. Even had to pick up the splinters if you dropped any around on her in her wood shed. She wanted them put in a basket. We'd have to clean that up. And we'd get back in the old wagon and go downtown, and up on the upper street, up in the next to the fairground where they lived, and we'd drive back down into the back lot, Spruce Pine, hitch your mules up to hitching rack there, and go down on Main Street and to the Spruce Pine store and get her brown sugar, and they might have sent for a bag of coffee or something like that. They ground the coffee, and them old crank grinders had the beans, you know, coffee beans, and they'd grind that. They'd ask you what drippolator, percolator, whatever size you wanted it ground. And then we'd get back in the wagon, take us, well, it'd take us, if we went real fast, probably 2.5, 3 hours. Took our time. We'd have to rest the mules because you had to go up a mountain like that, down a mountain like that, and up another, and up.
And you were going all the way back to Rock House Creek?
Yeah, all the way back. And we'd have to rest the mules, especially if you was loaded. Going in on that mountain, you'd let them pull just about all. They just pulled as hard as they could. Well, it was hard pulling a load of wood, and one of us had to get off and walk behind the wagon, and if you didn't get the scotch under the wagon in time, the one that was riding the seat driving, he'd pull the brake handle of the rope with the brakes. The old wooden shoe would come back in the wheel, and he'd hold it as hard as he could, each back wheel. The thing went through it like that, and that old rope was onto it with this thing stuck up. Pull this, and it'd throw that shoe back again the wheel. You'd get out there and throw a block. You'd have a block, and if you smash your fingers off, you're not careful. About that high under the, well, it's 4 or 5 inches high, solid wood block. And let the wagon roll back on that, and then the mules could stand there and rest for 10 or 15 minutes. And they wouldn't dare move till you'd tell them. Well,
how long does it take you to make that same trip in a car today?
Oh, that same trip would be 5, 10 minutes.
It take you sometimes 3, 4 hours.
That's right. The roads are much better today, even though if you was driving a 2-horse wagon loaded with wood, it'd still take you a couple, 3 hours.
Remember that time when me and you went up to Woody, what's his name?
Up to Uncle Floyd's?
Floyd Woody's. We took the old truck way back in the woods. You said they used to drive a wagon back
That's the
there.
same road.
That's the road that you
We
went.
come up out of there and up and down by that house and right on down the Daletown Road to the Woody Chair Shop, take a left and right into Spruce Pine, up the Burles Hill and down the far side, all the way across the river bridge. Same bridge.
You can't get a truck through there now, can you? It's broke
Not
up.
that old road after you pass over there at Tom Williams. It's,
Go a little.
we took that old truck of theirs, you know, into the woods. We'd kind of doubt whether we'd get back out of there or not, if you remember. We couldn't get all the way through. I had intentions of going all the way through there, but the road had grown up so bad that we turned back, remember?
But that was the wagon road.
That was the old wagon road right there. There's trees growed up in it since I was over there. No telling how
See,
big.
How mules could pull too big a load out there. Steve.
Well, it's steep. You just pull them up just till they got just every pound they could pull. It's like you're trying to roll a log till you got out of breath, and then you just had to stop them and let them rest. Then when you got ready again, if one of them, sometimes they'd balk, you'd have to use the check lines on them to make them pull. And mares didn't balk. They'd pull, they fell over for you. But we always let them rest. We could tell when they'd had enough, you know. And it just all day long whenever they were working like that. If you'd hauling one load after another, it's all day. They'd work like that, from daylight till dark.
When you hauled a load like that, it'd be late when you got back home.
Well, we'd usually get back home 5 o'clock, and it wouldn't be long. Time you got your mules unharnessed and watered and rub them down good, rub all the sweat off of them, and feed them and everything. Why, they'd probably be awaiting supper for you or already eaten. You'd have to eat a cold supper. And, well, usually,
What would you usually have for supper when you got in after a day's work like that?
well, usually have some fried pork shoulder, or occasionally you'd have fried ham, and have probably turnips, boiled turnips with red pepper and cooked in them, and have creamed potatoes, maybe gravy made off of the grease from the pork. I'd call that red eye gravy. Well, you just make it like you would regular white gravy, only you'd pour that pork grease on it. That was good when you'd worked out all day with hot cornbread or hot biscuits, right in an old wood stove oven. Couldn't beat them biscuits Mama made. They wasn't these little old bitty, round, thin, hard biscuits. They had great old big, fluffy biscuits.
Cathead biscuits like
Oh,
Jerry
yeah.
Clower talks about.
Why, cat had choked itself to death on one of them. And, there's a lot of things. If I could just had time to talk about it, I could tell tales for a week about it. But anyway, I was 5-year-old in October, and school started in early September or late August, best I remember. And I'd have been 6-year-old, you know, in October, and they didn't want me to get a late start to school, so my dad decided they could get me into school a little bit early like that before I was 6-year-old. I'd get a year's jump on well, in other words, I wouldn't be as long of finishing school if I ever did. And he told my mother just go ahead and start me in. So I had older brothers and sisters. We went to the name of the school was Wiseman School, a little county schoolhouse. Had 2 school teachers, and they had what they called a primer. It'd be the same thing as kindergarten, I guess now would be the first year of school. They used to send them, prior to their 6th birthday and just get them accustomed going to school. But the primer was 6-year-olds back then. And I was a little too young actually to start, but they sent me into school. And I remember Mrs. Hall was a lady teacher that was there, and Conley Harfield was a male teacher they had there. And both of them had the name of being strict. They was pretty rough on you if you didn't cooperate with the program. And she knew that I was underage because all my other brothers and sisters that went there, she knew about each family just like one of her own people near. There wasn't so many people in the community back then like they are now. She knew how old I was, so the first day at school, she let me sit in the desk up next to her. And she said, I'm going to go home with you this afternoon after school today. I want you to ride I believe she called it a surrey. The buggy, what I called it. She had a horse and buggy she rode. So she wouldn't invite the other children to ride because that'd been too hard on her horse. It was a fast traveling horse and it wasn't used to pulling just her. So she set me up in the seat beside her, and I remember that horse a trot, and man, it really covered some country now. And she said she could average 10 miles an hour, I believe she said that. And she said she could go 15 miles an hour, but said she couldn't go too long a distance at that speed, so she could just average about 10 miles an hour.
Trotting horse.
Yeah, that thing would really move out. And she took me home. I remember my mother coming out. She'd work and she had her big apron on. We lived in a log cabin. It was a 2-room cabin with a little, what we called a lean-to. Had a kitchen off that, built out of old split boards. They'd split with a froe. And shingles on the house was split with a froe. And the cracks in the logs was daubed with red mud. The inside of the house was lined with a heavy grade of cardboard, some type of a cardboard. I remember my Aunt Jane used to draw pictures, wall size, watercolor pictures, real pretty. She'd make religious scenes of angels and little white sheep, and she'd draw pictures of wild animals on some of the walls, and it was really something to see. I can remember one of those that she had done on an oilcloth, on a canvas it was, and they rolled it up and we kept that for years. I don't know what
Who was this Aunt Jane?
That was my daddy's sister, and she married Lester Matheny.
Okay.
And the house we lived in, Lester Matheny built it, and that was on the Cox farm up there. She was an heir of some of the property, so they built this log cabin there, and she died young. They never had any children. I think she is about 22-year-old or something when she died. I'm not positive the age, but it's 20-something. And my Uncle Lester moved to Forest City, North Carolina, and my daddy bought the cabin from us. And that was added on to his inheritance of the property that we had there on Rock House Creek. And that's where he moved to from over in the Grass Creek section. His stepmother had property over there, and they'd lived on that property until he purchased a cabin from Uncle Lester and then moved there. And we lived there. I don't remember when they moved there. That was before I was born. That's where I was born. And
So this cabin was at Rock House Creek?
Yeah,
Okay, and you were born there?
that's where I was born, but some of the older members of the family was born over in Grace Creek, over there in the field from where, down in below where Max built his new house, down,
There at Grassy Creek?
yeah, down there used to be some apple trees just out in the field from where his fish pond's at now, if you remember.
Uh-huh.
And there was where they told me the house was. I never remembered seeing it. But I do remember the big barn they had built up on top of the hill, just out in the field from where his house is now, just out in there.
Not
field
far
where-
from his barn now?
Well, it's in above where his barn's at, about maybe 175 or 80 feet, or 200 maybe. And we moved back over there. My dad built a house over on the other side of the banks from there. And we moved back, and I believe it was 1935 when we moved back to Spruce Pine.
Grassy Creek.
Yeah, and I'd have been 11 years old. Let's see. No, it must have been before that, because I had went to the Wiseman School a couple of years, and it was in 1933, I guess, when we moved from up there back to Grassy Creek.
Why did you move back to Grassy Creek?
He built a new house.
Oh,
We had property there, and the state road, the main highway was just a little ways from there, and older members of the family had been used to walking to 2.5 miles to catch a school bus and have to go to Spruce Pine. And they wanted to get over there where it would be easier for us children to get to the school bus. And he'd built that big, it would have been a fine home if he could have ever got enough material to finish it. Money was a thing that you didn't count on. You just did what you did on your own. In other words, if you got lumber sawed in those days, you had to pay and work, had to work back. The sawmill miller would probably cut you a house pattern if you'd work a year for him or something like that. Or they'd just trade among themselves.
The old barter system.
Yeah,
And this
That's
was in
on-
32 when you moved there?
33 I think it was.
Let's see, now when was the Great Depression? Wasn't that,
I
that
remember
was
hearing
before
them
that, wasn't
talk about it, but I don't remember it. There wasn't any such thing as depression for us because we didn't know what that was. But that was a good old days when times was bad, I guess you'd call it. But we didn't accept no handouts. Just a divide. In other words, if you had extra, you divided with your neighbor. And if your neighbor had extra, some of them would divide with you and some of them wouldn't. But it didn't make any difference. If we had extra food, my mother would give it to people whether you ever give us anything or not. And she'd say, well, it doesn't matter. They need something to eat and we don't. And my older brother would say, well, they killed a hog and they never offered us a bite. And he said, well, there's more of them, maybe they're hungrier than we are. So she would never fall out with anybody.
Well, how about church? What's the earliest things you remember about church?
I remember my oldest sister, Helen. She was a faithful churchgoer. She probably was one of the first that was really born again, I guess you'd say. She was a concentrated person, concentrated person in living right. And she'd go to church, she'd walk to church. I can remember when they used to ride the wagon, but it was a big task for my mother to get all us children ready, and we didn't actually have sufficient clothes to wear to church. But I don't know if that's the reason that she wouldn't take us. A lot of times we wouldn't go, or if it's just too big of a job to make the trip and what. But we didn't go much when we lived way up on Rock House Creek. Helen would go, she'd walk usually by herself, or my older sister Leela, I don't remember her staying at home too much, but if she is at home, she usually stayed with my granddad Cox. And Helen would walk to my granddad's. That was a mile and a half, I guess, or maybe a little further from where we lived, his house. And then it was another mile and a half, I guess, to the church. And she'd walk there, and then maybe my granddad or my step-grandmother and my granddad would walk on to church with her. Just different times, different people would go, you know. Just more or less like it is today. Some people goes, misses a week or two, and then goes again. But Helen was faithful. She went regular to church.
Well, did she ever take you with her?
She has took me. After we moved over in the Grace Creek section, it wasn't too far to church there. It was probably a mile and a half or a mile and a quarter or something like that to church. And I'd go. I went a lot. After, well, you know, when you're growing up, they didn't let you go like they do young people now unless you was with the family. Family'd go anywhere while all of us would load in the wagon and go. And during revival meetings, a lot of times we'd ride the wagon. Then after I got up, 12 or 14 year old, well, then they'd let me go to church anytime I wanted to. And I could ride a mule if I wanted to church. And I didn't like to ride the mules because it's too much trouble. They'd get loose a lot of times, slip the bridles off and run. I'd have to catch them, take an hour or two to catch them. So I'd usually just walk. A bunch of us get together and walk to church. That was fun back then. And if we could have a set of flashlight batteries, we was in the business. We'd walk back up the highway. That wasn't bad at all. There wasn't much traffic back then, maybe a car every hour or maybe every 2 hours. And after church, after they all left church, there wouldn't be maybe a car till daylight next morning. And we'd walk up the highway, no problem. But whenever you'd get to where we left the highway and started through the woods on this little drive we had up to the house there, about a quarter of a mile through the woods, well, we'd hide our flashlight. Or you wouldn't want to carry it, or I wouldn't. I'd usually hide my flashlight in the leaves there. Come back and you'd know by a post where you turn off the road where to reach and get your flashlight, and it'd be usually the moon is shining, you'd know where it was at. In other words, you'd travel the night enough, it didn't bother you too bad. But I'd come there, and I remember one time, hadn't been to church, but I'd been to one of the neighbors' house to listen to, we didn't have a radio back then. I'd been to listen to Lum and Abner, I think it was, on the radio. And I come back up that road there by myself about 11 o'clock one night. It was pitch black, dark. And I was having to concentrate on where I was at by the trees, you know, just watching the trees. I knew pretty well where to turn just to the line of the trees. Sometimes you'd have to feel your way. I fell along the bank with my hands till I'd feel where the path turned off going up over the bank of the old road, taking the near cut. I was coming up that old road and I heard something come off of that bank like that, and it come right up and stuck its nose to my hand. Well, I think it's a dog, but it scared me till I couldn't holler or couldn't run. I just froze in my tracks, and that thing just smelled in my hands, and I stood there a little bit till I got my feet to moving, and got a big breath there, and I screamed. You could have heard me 4 miles. And that, whatever it was, I think was a dog. It took off like I'd stomped it. And I got my feet to going, and I moved on up the road there and went to the house. A lot of things had happened to me to scare me for a few minutes. I'd hear what I really dreaded is to go somewhere and them start telling Hank tales.
Uh-huh.
Telling about, they call it Hank tales. I think they got a fancy name for it nowadays. They forget what they call it nowadays. Haunts, I believe. And
Well, that was an old tape that I recorded with my dad back around Christmas time, 1981. And wish I could spend more time with him and let him tell me some more stories. Those were some good memories. Thanks everyone for listening.